Okay, I am happy to be joined. I'm here at the NHL Draft in Nashville, and happy to be joined by Matt Rodell, the Director of Hockey Analytics for the Dallas Stars. And that is about as formal as I will try to be during this conversation, I promise.
I appreciate you guys having me. You might be the least intelligent guy you'll have on this podcast between you two and the other guests, but you know what? Happy to join. Appreciate you guys having me.
I'm normally supposed to be the self-deprecating one here because I'm normally supposed to be the one that picks at my own intelligence level. So.
Hockey guys, this is going to be a competition between hockey guys. So you know what? I can be self-deprecating with the best of them.
So let's start with your role. Kind of, how did you end up in your role with the Dallas Stars, Director of Analytics? Can you take us through your career path and how you ended up here in this role with the team?
I mean, so I went to school and knew I wanted to work in hockey and was very fortunate to get an internship in the OHL and help build an analytics department up there with our staff at Sault Ste. Marie. Graduated and knew I wanted to work in sports, didn't know what it was going to look like, and needed to get a foot in the door. So I took a job in ticket sales actually in Dallas and had the chance to meet some of our staff. I met Mark Janko while I was there, our assistant general manager, and stayed in touch with those guys, but eventually took a job back up in Sault Ste. Marie with the Greyhounds and stepped up and I did. I was part of our analytics staff up there with Tyson Enfield and worked under Kyle Raptis and Sheldon Keefe. Drew Bannister was our head coaches and just had the chance to go up there and learn. Started off as just the analytics guy and eventually stepped into a video coaching role with them and saw that progress. Stayed in touch with the guys in Dallas and had the privilege to talk to a few other teams, but an opportunity came up in Austin and I took that as the video coach and stepped in, worked with our group down there, and then had the opportunity to go up and work with the big club and did that for the last few years and saw the transition here last year from the video side over to the analytics side. So,
in your role with Dallas, you were the number 2 on the video side with Kelly Forbes, who recently, I'm going to give Kelly some love here. Kelly Forbes, for people who don't know, Kelly spent 15 years in Dallas, probably one of the only video guys who had a cult following outside of
between the video guys and the public sphere. There was times where I had to say, "Hey, Kelly Forbes, I love you to death. We're gonna deflate the ego a little bit." But great man. It's funny. He had his 1,000th game. I want to say it was last year, if I'm not mistaken. But you realize how big of an accomplishment that is when you're kind of in the league and you get in the mix and you're traveling, you're going back and forth. For him, he's got a couple of kids at home that are younger and balancing that, the lifestyle, like you just really admire him. And he was an unbelievable mentor for me for 3 years that I was there. And obviously this last year we worked really closely together. So.
In your role, was it a new role the Stars created? Was it a role that kind of evolved? Like, how did your role come up? The creation of your role, was it one that you were for lack of a better word, the pioneer and the first person in it? Like, how did your role come up?
Yeah, well, so we've had an analytics presence with our group for, I want to say it's been multiple years. It predates me coming in with the team when I got on in 2018-19 with Austin. Mm-hmm. Between Alex Lepore and Sam Lights, they really built the framework for our group and helped us take a step in terms of, how do we want to look at the numbers from a front office perspective? And, they took that and they built the framework out and built some of the communication pathways out for us. And then for me in the last off season, I've been a proponent for analytics for a long time and been a proponent of, hey, I think we can get a lot of really great information out of this working with whatever partner. And you sit there and you start to have conversations with whether it's management, coaches, players, and our management team. Jim, he came up to me at one point last offseason towards the beginning and said, "Hey, we're thinking about expanding our analytics department and we'd like for you to kind of step in and help direct that. You've worked on the coaching side, you've worked on the front office side. We'd like to take this to a next step. And we think that you'd be the guy to be able to help us." And learning a lot. It's been a year of figuring it out and learning a lot of new technology and a lot of new pieces and networking. And I've got a great staff that I lean on between Alex and Sam and Brad Behan and Derek Lasker and a couple other third-party guys that we work with. I've just been very well insulated and learned a lot and really fortunate to get to work with those guys every day.
And why? So not yet. I got the career path.
Yeah.
But why? What about it stuck? There's always something, right? There's whether it's an interest or what about hockey analytics made that was the spark for this was I want to go down this path. What stuck out to you about analytics?
Yeah. It's gonna sound super cliche because it feels like whenever you listen to a podcast, you talk to certain guys, it feels like guys sit there and say, hey, I've had an interest in numbers from a young age, but that's true for me. I remember high school, we had a data management class, and everybody's trying to piece together random projects, and I dove into, and I'm about to be canceled for this, but Duke basketball. I was a Duke basketball guy growing up, and you sit there and you pay attention to the team, and I'm like, I'm going to dive into the numbers of this for a big project we had, and go through and dive in. I was an Excel warrior at that time, and you sit there and you kind of go through and you start to get your hands on numbers, and you start to look at, man, you can see some inefficiencies in the team, and you can see some strengths of the team analytical, or at that point, it's really not even analytics. I'd call it very fundamental stats. Mm-hmm. But that kind of sparked the interest in the Q&A. Then from there, getting the chance to work in Sault Ste. Marie, build that department up, work with Kyle Dubas and Tyson Enfield very closely. Like, you realized analytics has the ability to help mold and shape a team and shape direction. And honestly, it can go hand in hand pretty closely at times with what you see in the eye test and what coaches would sit there and say. And I've really been passionate about merging those two items together to help a team. At the end of the day, we all want to win. That's another aspect, right? You want to win a championship, and it doesn't matter what league you're in. But those would kind of be my big points. I don't know if I danced around.
No, that's but from what you can answer, obviously, because I know that it's the funny thing. We had Eric Polsky on the show, and we had a similar discussion with him where there's only so much. It's a competition. One team wins the cup at the end. Obviously, there are secrets that teams keep, but from when it comes to the analytics department's role, is it more so of a day-to-day thing? Is it more so of a big picture thing, or where is that kind of now fall in an NHL department? And I would imagine one of the biggest parts of your job and all of that is the communication with a couple other different departments.
Oh yeah. This is where my background has come in really handy. I do have the academic background, and I can we can go upstairs and talk even internally with our group and dive into certain ways we want to quantify the game. But then at the same time, I've spent years in the locker room, so I can go downstairs and check in with our coaches and players, and it's not something where you necessarily force the item at points. Like I'm not going to go downstairs and slam my fist on a table and sit here and say analytically this and this, but our coaches are incredibly inquisitive. Our players are incredibly interested, and our front office guys, like I said, Jim was the guy that kind of spurred this on. And same thing with our AGMs, Scott White and Mark Janko. The interest level is there from everybody. So for me, a big part of my role is sitting there and saying, hey, let's take this and let's communicate it, regardless of it's more of an academic context. If it's more in a coach's context, really looking at the game and sitting there and saying, hey, this number means this because this team plays this way, or because this player has this tendency, and it matches sometimes with the eye test, sometimes it doesn't, but communicating that in a way where it's not it doesn't turn into an ego match. It turns into hey, we're here working together. Like let's find direction for our group or for our team and go from there. But
the video coaching element history, you obviously go through and you work through a spot where you figure out the science of communicating with players and coaches and everything like that. It's almost, and it's kind of naturally happens. Like I've talked to other people in the video coaching world who also naturally end up touching into the analytics world. Mm-hmm. Talk a little bit about the marriage between those, about just kind of you talk about the show and tell part of it to connect, like just being able to, I would imagine it's something, sometimes it'd be as simple as the numbers mean this, but for a player or another coach, maybe you don't understand it unless you see this clip or something like that. Like,
a lot of it ties together. So I would sit there and I'd say, from a video coaching perspective, you step in and you talk to some video guys, and a big part of the game was sitting there learning how, all right, I'm going to mark a game and break down a game. I don't necessarily just want to get caught up in the sequence of events. I want to learn the systems and learn the flow based on, the certain sequencing that I see. It's a flow-based sport, but there's certain options and certain plays that are naturally going to most likely happen after a breakout or a forecheck or a scoring chance, or, you go down the list, certain events tie together. So from the video coaching side, watching that and realizing that flow and having the chance to, soak in the game from that initial flow-based perspective. And once again, that can tie into the analytical component, but being able to sit there and learn systems, right? I've been really fortunate to work with a bunch of really great coaches over the course of my career, starting in Sault Ste. Marie and working all the way up to Dallas. Most recently, obviously, Rick Bowness last year, John Stevens was a great mentor for me. And now you look at our coaching staff between Pete DeBoer, Wayne Azardine, Steve Spott, Jeff Reese, we've got just this wealth of knowledge, experience, and a consortium of different interests and different philosophies, right? So for me, having the chance to really soak that all in, it hasn't just shaped how I view the game, it's shaped how I think we can quantify the game analytically. And it's really, I think long-term going to be very, very beneficial for the Dallas Stars.
I've heard stories about, when it comes to sometimes just connecting with players, and I've talked to players before, where sometimes you can get the analysis by paralysis by analysis, right? Yeah. Where it's I'm sure you go into a meeting and you got 15 clips there. The guys, I've heard stories eyes glazing over, all of that.
Oh yeah.
So you always hear about that with players. But I'm curious from coaches, and you've worked with some coaches who have been in the game for a long time. And part of the reason that they're still in the game is you have to adjust. Oh, yeah. And so what are some of the things that you can share just about that maybe that's stuck to you about those head coaches, or doesn't be a head coach, but this is the type of thing where they realize this is a tool or anything like that?
Yeah. So I would sit there and a lot of our projects, especially on the coaching side, are spurred on by our group. So there's that, like I was saying, there's that natural interest in using analytics to help inform decision making. It's not the sole piece. We mentioned it earlier. Sitting there tying in individual components, sitting there and saying, okay, what's the additional context to this particular metric or this particular percent, whatever it may be. Our guys are great and really spur along that process. So I sit there on my end of things and I look at it, and you mentioned the eyes glazing over thing, or on the video side, the power of pause. Yeah. Right? It's a fast game. There's a lot of stuff going on. You can sit there and hit a space bar on the video side, and all of a sudden you sit there and go, hey, there's that option, that option, that option. This year for me, up in a press box for the first time and watching, it's funny to say this, but live hockey in person for the first time in 5-6 years, it took time to readjust and be able to sit there and say, hey, it's a fast game. And yes, I can see options from a press box, but what does that player see from that perspective? So it's been interesting to go into it, kind of shifting gears back to the analytical piece and being able to communicate and realize, honestly, reading a room and saying, hey, you know what? We're going to talk about this. We've got a subject matter that the coaches are interested in. I'm going to hit a certain point, or management or whoever. I'm going to talk about a certain point, read the room, and be able to understand, you know what? I might have to circle back on it again or have another casual conversation at some point. Players, most of the time, they'll sit there and say, hey, I want to come up and ask Matt about X, Y, or Z. And it's realizing communication styles with a coach or a manager or players, it's going to change based on who I'm talking to, right? You ask any teacher, delivering information, it's going to change from student to student. It's going to change. You're in the workplace, whatever your listeners do. Talking with one coworker is going to be different than talking with another, right? So being able to really evaluate that and read the room a little bit at times and mix in analytics, but have some personality with it, I find that's really key to at least mitigate some of the eyes glaze over dynamic.
Isn't it amazing sometimes? Not like you realize it's a fast game, but isn't it amazing when you do go up top and sometimes you realize how easy the game, easy the game looks up top. And we fall into that trap in media sometimes all the time where you'll be like, well, why didn't this guy do that right there? It's right there. And then you get
and even honestly, even position groups, right? You look at it, how our goaltending coach watches the game is going to be different than how the D coach watches the game, than how the forward coach watches the game. And I find if your team is really strong or really weak in a certain area, you tend at times to hyper focus on some of those things. Like, I'm a glass half full kind of guy. Like, I try and focus on the positives, but I have times where if I sit there and I'm like, hey, I think this is a flaw in how we're playing right now, I can get hyper focused on a certain piece. And part of tying in that analytics dynamic is being able to sit there and say, hey, it's not as bad as you think it is, or hey, it's not as good as you think it is. It's bringing in that external context and really grounding yourself and tying it all in.
When we had Tulsky on, he made the example of the internal data compared to the external data. I think a lot of listeners we have here see some of the external data. Like he made the example of using a light switch, where it's where in external data, you turn the flight switch on, turn it on and off every 10 seconds. Where in an NHL game, with all the data points you get, it's just basically lights are on all the time. And that's a lot of data. And I'm curious, as you look at figuring out what's noise and what's meaning things and everything like that, like how tough is that? Because I'm sure there's some times where you may have gone down a path where you're like, I just spent X amount of hours looking at this and it didn't mean this or anything like that.
I wish I was half as intelligent as Eric Tulsky, because my analogies, if I could even use that, would be incredible.
I mean, he corrected me on his bio on the Hurricanes website was corrected because of our show. His number of patents was wrong on the Hurricanes website.
He's an entrepreneur and he's got it down. I'm sitting out here like, no patent is under my name. You don't have to worry. My bio will stay the same. But it's been interesting for me stepping in, because you realize how expansive the data set really is. You sit there at times and you sit there and go, man, hey, how can we quantify this? But then for me, really stepping in year one, you realize how much is available and you go, okay, how do we want to define this as Dallas Stars hockey, right? Every team and really every coach, like I can't tell you how many coaching meetings I've sat in. It's something as simple as this is a scoring chance for one guy and then for another guy, it's not, right? Or, hey, this certain sequence I would say is this type of play, and this certain sequence I'd say is another type of play. So going in and building out the framework of this is Dallas Stars hockey. This is how we view hockey. We view certain sequences. We view this as even something as simple as, hey, this is a neutral zone sequence, or hey, this is an O zone sequence, or hey, this is a D zone. This is a D zone coverage type dynamic. Going in and realizing that some of that massaging needs to take place. It's been a big part of our process. And then from there, you just, once again, you also just realize how expansive the data set is and what's available to us. I mean, coming from way back in the day, I talk about Sault Ste. Marie building out an apartment. I stepped in and we didn't have a means to track data. We didn't have even something as simple as time on ice. I remember going and finding a free, I want to say it was a Czech time on ice app that whenever you closed it out, it didn't save the time on ice, any of it. So you had to print it. And, like I said, I was an Excel warrior. So I sat there and I'm like, I don't have a choice. I've got to get this done. I sat in a basement and I would track all that stuff by hand for hours in the basement. And now you look at it, and in the NHL, there's just so much data available from the public sphere perspective. And there's some great work being done publicly to, what we track internally and how we massage things internally. There's a ton of information out there. So really going through and saying, hey, this might be a little bit more noise. There might be a little more substance here. This might be something I'm missing. That has all been a big process for us this year.
You brought up two things in my head for a minute. First, you made me think of Ben Bishop. He was technically a Buffalo Sabres employee for 72 more hours or whatever it is. But I remember we would talk to Ben late in his playing career about analytics, and he would always talk about expected goals that he would go through. He had his trademarked rant where if I put Ovechkin on that circle, that's more of an expected goal than anyone else in the world on that.
He's you know what, I remember very explicitly talking with him in the bubble about neutral zone transition, and like that's why you need to talk to players. As much as I think I'm an athlete, I am not even remotely an athlete, and I've never played an NHL game. So that vantage point and that perspective, we've got Rich Peverly on our staff right now, being able to bounce ideas off of him and provide additional context on whether it be certain players, certain teams. Tevz is a big proponent of all this stuff, and he's very interested in it. So being able to bounce ideas back and forth and tying in that player perspective into, certain metrics, it's needed. And I think you miss a lot if you don't sit there and tap in and say, hey, like, for example, with Bish, we're talking about a neutral zone regroup sequence in the bubble, and we're going back and forth, and at that point, I was on the video side. So I'm tying in some analytical components of it and saying, hey, whether it be a buzzword like possession or, whatever you want to talk about, but him being able to sit there, and I remember it clear as day, he's like, I sit there and I watch the system. He's like, from the net, you see X, Y, and Z. Mm-hmm. And I find that invaluable, that perspective. So
the other thing, and one of for my career as a reporter and anyone, I think one of the most valuable things that I always fall back on was when I covered high school sports, and you have to keep your own stats as a reporter. And I remember I would have the yellow legal pad. I'd be going to a high school girls basketball game in Kerrville, Texas.
Yeah.
And you'd be tracking and the data compiled. And so where I'm going with this, we like to ask people on this, as people want to get into hockey analytics and kind of, this is a path, someone, hey, I'm interested, I want to do this. What are some of your kind of advice or whatever, some of the guidelines you would give to someone who said, hey, I'd like to maybe explore this field? What would your advice be?
Yeah, I mean, I would sit there and I would say you've got to start somewhere. Right. I get a lot of messages from college students and, from even young professional. I get a few messages from people that have been in the professional world for a long time that sit there and say, hey, I'm really interested in analytics. What does this look like? And I'm more than willing to have those conversations. Time of year gets to be tough. I had a few people reach out right before the playoffs or literally right after the playoffs. And it's, those times of year tend to get tough. But I sit there and I remember being a college kid and basically sitting there saying, I need to start somewhere. I'm just going to start going to games, and I'm going to reach out. And this, I grew up a fan of I won't even say the team, but a certain Southern market professional team. I lived in the state as a kid, and I just fell in love with the team. And I was listening to one of the radio broadcasts as a student, and the radio guy gave his email out. And I'm like, you know what? I'm going to email him and just say, hey, I'm a college kid. I'd really like to go to a game with a scout. I'm really interested in learning this side of the game. Any suggestions? And I didn't think the guy was going to email me back. I sent him, I think it was a 3 or 4 paragraph thing. And he got back to me. He's like, hey, I forwarded your email to our assistant general manager. He'll get you in touch. And before I realized it, I'm going to a game with their director of amateur scouting. Right. And it's, while that's not directly analytically inclined, the concept of at some point you need to take a step and you need to, for lack of a better way of putting it, shoot your shot. Right. Whether that's putting stuff out publicly or, reaching out to a junior team and getting involved in that capacity. I talked about the Sioux Greyhounds, and I'm a diehard Sioux Greyhounds guy through and through, but, the group in Kitchener put together a really great analytical staff that mesh in together. They teach everything from coding to this is how you should view the game to, hey, this is our statistical modeling process. They really get into that there just based on talking very briefly with their group and following from afar. That's the kind of stuff that, at some point you need to take the step. You need to take a step in that direction and realize you're going to be wrong. You're going to ask questions that, are, for lack of a better way of putting it, I don't think there's any such thing as a stupid question, but are fundamental, right? But you got to ask those and you got to take those steps. And I'd say the other thing is when you do get in the industry, realize that, and it's funny, I'm going to use this analogy, but I was listening to a podcast a couple weeks ago, and they were talking about the concept of being a good hang. And essentially it was basically saying, and it was talking about, actually, it's funny, it's Nashville music business, but it was talking about the business side of the music industry in Nashville. And the guy was on the record producing side, and he was saying most of the people that are successful are a good hang. They have the ability to go in, and yeah, they're going to be focused, hyper-focused, and very, like, have a great work ethic, and they're going to do what they need to do outside of it. But they're going to also have their outlets where they can step back and really recharge their battery, and whatever that looks like. And I see that with my staff now, right? I see that with, I've got a guy on my staff, Brad, who is very passionate about, soccer analytics and coding and development and everything else along those lines. And that's how he recharges. And that's great. And then I've got another guy on my staff, Derek, who, is passionate about a lot of the same things, but he'll also go play video games. Brad will go play video games. I think being able to find that niche and find that balance and being able to sit there and say, yeah, I'm really passionate about hockey and I'm going to learn and do what I need to do to get into it. That's fantastic, right? Having that balance is key.
I think the other thing too, and I will kind of add to this, and you tell me if I'm wrong on this, but I think the other thing that goes a long way if you're trying to reach out to someone or whatever is to try, and obviously you can't know someone's complete day to day, but for example, I think it's the same reason that don't do it on a game day. And try to send your email at like 9 a.m. Yeah. Like it's a very simple, silly little thing sometimes. But if someone for listening, like if you think about people who are working in hockey, like you start to understand the game days. That's the main focus. If you try to reach out during that time, sometimes it could get lost. And I think there's little things like that just I think. It's important to just kind of research who you're reaching out to as well sometimes as well.
Well, and I've talked about all these guys I've had a chance to work with over the years, and frankly, hockey guys tend to be good guys, right? Like I haven't really met anybody on a front office, scouting, coaching, even player perspective, where you sit there and go like, hey, like this guy isn't willing to have a conversation. Most of them are willing to talk, but like you're saying, approaching it in the right capacity where you're straightforward. Like, once again, I'll tie this same podcast series. The guy talked about, people trying to reach out and get a time to book a meeting, being blunt and straightforward. Like I had somebody reach out in Dallas and she said, hey, I'm interested in learning more about this. I would like to schedule a meeting. Here are the 3 times that I'm available. If there's another time that works better for you, great. Right. And it's direct. If the times didn't work for me, I could sit there and say that. But she was like, hey, these are the days that I can make work. And it wasn't like a dance around, right? I've got, occasionally you get and I'm sure you get this too, the message where you just get the, hey, or how's it going, right? And it's...
You have no idea how to respond to that.
Yeah, and there's no rapport there. It's just, for lack of a better way of putting it, it's a casual conversation on the street, right? I'm going to say hey to somebody on the street. Like I feel like I'm a pretty personable, outgoing guy. I'm not going to sit there and shut somebody out. But that's the duration of the conversation is, hey, and that's it. If you go in, you make your intentions clear, and you're direct without being pushy, most of the time you're going to get at least your response. And if the response is, hey, appreciate it, don't have the time to have a conversation. I had a few people reach out about mentorships and everything else along those lines. And unfortunately, during the hockey season, we just don't have time. You're bouncing all over the place. You're on and off planes. You've got random projects that are coming. You've got this and that, trade deadline, free agency, draft. You go down the list. It just feels like there's one thing after the other. But I'm more than willing to answer questions and provide whatever little insight I can based on what I've received myself, right? Like it's that pay it forward scheme is so common in hockey, and I think it's a great part about our game.
Last one for me on this, and I say that because I'm trying to hold myself accountable because I'm really bad at ending interviews in general. And I need to be better about that in the audio format so people don't just trail off like I can do if we were having a normal conversation. How much do you kind of mentioned it earlier in the public sphere? Yeah. And I think that's something where you mentioned putting your stuff out there and doing your work and everything like that. I don't think people sometimes realize how much NHL teams and NHL personnel read what else is out there.
Oh yeah, I mean we're all on Twitter. We pay attention, and I think especially if the guys on my staff listen to this, they're going to be rolling their eyes when I use this comparison. When NHL guys, at least from my perspective, pay attention to what happens on Twitter, you kind of have the two perspectives, right? You have either the hockey perspective or you have more of the academia perspective. Academia, just the way that if anybody's read a peer-reviewed journal entry, anything else along those lines, you sit there and how you read it, towards the end of it, they sit there and say, hey, these are the holes in my study. This is what I did wrong. Any friends that I've talked to that I've had to present a thesis, they sit there and it's constructive criticism, but it's back and forth, right? And a lot of times they're communicating a lot of really great things when it comes to the hockey perspective, but it can come across overly abrasive. Whereas on the hockey side, they sit there and their perspective can be, this is what I've experienced in the game. This is what years and years and years of, whether it's playing, watching, being involved with the team, this is kind of where I form my basis. And a lot of times the message is the same, but it's communicated differently. And, any perceived tension can sometimes come from just different communication styles. So it's interesting when you pay attention to public sphere work and, sometimes it's people want viewership or they want clicks, and I can't blame them for that. I totally get it. And frankly, I've gotten to the point in, my wise, ripe year of 32, shoot me. But where, you sit there and you realize they've got a platform they're trying to push, or they've got a message that they're trying to push. And whether I completely agree with their perspective or not, I appreciate the hustle and I appreciate the information. But sometimes that can tie into that noise perspective. But it's really just difference in communication styles, right? It's very interesting to pay attention to the public sphere work and get an idea of where people are heading. And, there's some guys that I've had a chance to meet with that are on the public side that whether it's a great, efficient visual that communicates their findings, or it's, hey, they've dove in and they've done more work and they've got ideas on this, and this, for our perspective, and I'm sure a lot of the guys that work in the public world have NHL guys that reach out regularly. It's interesting to be able to dive in and learn from those guys just as much as we learn from our staff.
Well, I said I was going to be good and cut off, so I'm going to do that. Matt, thank you for joining the show. Thank you for coming on. Thank you for the great insight, and we'll hopefully have you on another time, maybe another draft or some other time like that.
hey, I appreciate you guys having me. I can talk to a brick wall. So I'd be more than willing to talk to a brick wall again. You just tell me when. We'll figure it all out.